They said the records were burned in 1865, that the fires of Selma erased every trace of Thornhill Manor, but the ledger survived, bound in human skin, sealed with wax bearing the crest of a secret brotherhood, the Society of Medical Inquiry. Inside its pages was an entry so grotesque, so methodical, that even the archivist who discovered it in 1912 refused to speak of it again. It began with one act, a husband offering his wife to a slave, and ended with the birth of a myth the South still buries under its soil. Tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't belong to any hour of the day. It belongs to that shadowed time between the ticking of clocks, the space where truth and madness breathe the same air. In the summer of 1841, Colonel Edmund Thornhill gathered his servants in the drawing room. The candlelight made his shadow taller than the doorframe. His wife, Virginia, once beautiful, now immense, her body swollen by disease and grief, sat in her reinforced chair beside him. And beside her stood Silas, a man barely 4 feet tall, his wrists still red from the iron that had held him days before. The colonel's voice carried the weight of command. From this night forward, he said, Silas is to attend to Mrs. Thornhill's every need. No other servant shall enter her room without my word. The room froze. The servants' faces turned to stone. Esther, the cook, whispered a prayer under her breath. She had seen many cruelties in that house, but this was something else, a command that defied both reason and decency. Virginia did not speak. Her eyes trembled, flickering between her husband and the dwarf who now bowed before her. She understood the humiliation this act represented, but she also saw something in Silas's eyes that disturbed her more deeply than fear. It was recognition. For 2-3 months, Thornhill had been receiving letters from Charleston, sealed with the sigil of a serpent devouring its own tail. The Society of Medical Inquiry, wealthy men obsessed with the alchemy of blood. They believed certain vital properties could be transferred between bodies, that disease could be purified through controlled suffering. They called it transmutation of the humours. Thornhill called it salvation. What he did not tell his wife, or anyone in his household, was that Silas had been purchased for more than servitude. His blood was different, tested, mixed, measured. The previous owner, a Louisiana doctor named Beauchamp, had written that Silas's constitution defied ordinary degeneration. His wounds healed too quickly. His temperature never wavered. Some claimed he could survive fevers that killed whole plantations. And so the experiment began, a woman dying of her own flesh, a slave whose blood seemed incorruptible. The society promised that if Thornhill succeeded, he would not only save his wife but become part of a new scientific aristocracy, men who would command life itself. But the price was higher than he imagined. That night, while the house slept and the river outside murmured against the stones, Thornhill descended into the forbidden basement, his hidden laboratory. There, among jars of preserved organs and surgical tools blackened by time, he wrote the first entry in his journal. Subject 1. Transfer begins at dawn. The wife consents in silence. The dwarf understands his purpose. God forgive me for what I am about to prove. And as he dipped his pen into the ink, the candles flickered, not from wind but as though the house itself exhaled. The descent had begun. By dawn, the manor was silent except for the sound of cicadas screaming in the wet Alabama air. A heat so thick it blurred the horizon clung to the walls like a fever. Colonel Thornhill moved through the house with a surgeon's precision, each step echoing down corridors that hadn't known sunlight in years. The servants dared not rise before he called. They listened instead, to the dragging of boots, to the low creak of the drawing-room door, and to the voice of a man who believed he was speaking to God. In the great chair sat Virginia Thornhill, her body wrapped in linen soaked with camphor and vinegar. Her eyes were open but distant, as though she had already detached from the world above her breathing. Silas stood beside her, stripped to the waist, his skin glistening, the scars across his ribs visible even in the dim light. He did not flinch when Thornhill approached with the instrument, a narrow steel tube connected to a hand pump, a design borrowed from old battlefield medicine. It was not meant for healing, it was meant for transfer. Thornhill's journals described the act clinically. At 6:47 a.m., venesection performed on both subjects. Blood drawn from Silas, injected into the wife's left arm in measured increments. Subject reports mild dizziness. Silas reports no pain. Procedure successful. But there are words missing, words erased in later entries, what the household heard that morning, what made Judith the housekeeper drop to her knees and pray until her voice cracked. They heard Virgilia laugh. Not the gentle, ladylike laugh of her youth, but a sound sharp and unholy, bubbling through her throat like boiling tar. They said it went on for nearly a full minute, until her voice broke into gasps that sounded like sobs or moans. When it stopped, the manor went still, and then came the smell, iron and sweat, and something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit. The tiskas. Colonel recorded her pulse, stronger, skin, warmer, breathing, steady. He marked it all as success. But that night, when the house slept, Virgilia whispered to Celia, her maid, through the darkness. "He's inside me," she said. "The small man's blood is moving through me, I can feel it thinking." Silas was confined to a cot in the cellar, watched over by Marcus and Isaiah, the colonel's attendants. They said he didn't sleep. He sat upright all night, whispering in a language none of them knew. When asked what he said, he replied only once, "It's not my voice, it's hers now." By the third day, the transformation was undeniable. Virgilia's face lost its pallor, her eyes brightened, her appetite returned. The colonel wrote to Charleston, "Initial success confirmed. Subject exhibits vigor unseen in months. Society's faith justified. Preparing for full transfusion." But what the letter didn't say, what he couldn't explain, was the shift in her demeanor. She began calling him by a name he didn't recognize. She laughed at things no one said. Her voice took on a strange cadence, half southern drawl, half something older, primal. And when Silas was brought before her to receive his next cut, she reached out and touched his face. "My little doctor," she whispered, "you've done this before, haven't you?" Thornhill dismissed it as delirium, the product of narcotics and nerves. But when he left the room, Celia saw the truth in Virgilia's eyes. She wasn't delirious, she was remembering something that wasn't hers, something that belonged to him. That night, the river outside turned the color of rust, and the dogs began howling, not at the moon, but at the house. Because something inside it was changing, something that had no name yet. The fourth night came with no stars. The air above Dallas County sagged like wet cloth, pressing down on the Thornhill estate until even the insects fell quiet. The servants whispered that God had turned his face away from the house. They were wrong. Something else was watching. By then, Virgilia Thornhill could walk, slowly, painfully, but with her own strength. Her body, once swollen and inert, began to shrink as if the sickness was draining out through invisible channels. Her skin regained a strange porcelain clarity. Even her voice, once breathless and weak, carried across the halls with eerie steadiness. The colonel saw it as proof. The society's methods had worked. But every night, after her husband fell into his opiate sleep, Virgilia would rise. Barefoot, she would wander the darkened halls, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. Esther saw her once, moving past the kitchen door, a candle trembling in her hand, and behind her, barely visible, was Silas, not following, but guiding. The two would disappear down the back staircase, the one that led to the forbidden cellar. Esther swore she heard them speaking there, not words exactly, more like murmuring between two people who had long known each other in another life. By morning, Virgilia's skin bore faint red marks, fingerprints the size of a child's hand. When Thornhill noticed, he asked her what had happened. She smiled, slow and strange. "It's just the body remembering itself," she said. He didn't understand. Not yet. The next entry in his journal reads like the confession of a man stepping off the edge of reason. Silas's pulse remains steady despite repeated blood loss. His constitution defies expectation. Mrs. T shows marked improvement in strength and alertness. However, her demeanor changes. Eyes appear dilated at all hours, shows signs of nocturnal activity. Speech patterns mirror Silas's tone. Ian phrasing. Subject insists she hears his heartbeat in her sleep. Possible sympathetic resonance between donor and recipient. The colonel's obsession deepened. He ordered the basement sealed from all but himself. He stopped attending church. He stopped writing to his neighbors. Every waking hour became an experiment, every heartbeat a calculation. But behind the sterile notes was something else, a tremor of fear. He was losing her, not to death, but to something far older and infinitely more intimate. The servants began leaving tokens under their pillows, crosses, bits of salt, lockets of hair. One morning, Penny, the youngest, was found sleepwalking into the field barefoot and silent. When they stopped her, she said she was going where the lady called. Her eyes were glassy, unblinking. On the 6th day, Virgilia asked to see Silas alone. No witnesses. When Thornhill returned, she was sitting by the window, humming a tune no one had ever heard. Silas lay on the floor beside her chair, his breathing shallow, his eyes rolled white. She looked up at her husband and said, "He's given enough. It's my turn now." That night, Thornhill dreamt of rivers turning black, of veins winding like roots beneath the earth. He woke to find his wife standing over him, candlelight trembling across her face. She leaned close and whispered something that turned his blood to ice. "You gave me his body, Edmund, but it's the soul that moves the flesh." When he lit the lamp, she was gone, and down in the cellar, the walls began to bleed. By the 7th night, the manor itself had begun to change. The air inside grew heavy and electric, as though every breath carried a charge. Doors no longer closed properly, mirrors warped their reflections. Even the clocks seemed to lose their rhythm, ticking unevenly, like hearts beating out of sync. Colonel Thornhill no longer slept. He wandered the corridors with a pistol in one hand and a lantern in the other, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes hollow from morphine and dread. He could hear them below him, his wife and the dwarf, whispering in the dark, speaking in that impossible language that no living man was meant to know. The servants were forbidden to enter the cellar, but rumour moves through fear like smoke through wood. Esther said the smell rising from beneath the floorboards had changed. Not rot, but something sweet and thick, like flowers blooming in a graveyard. She told the colonel it was unnatural, that he should call the preacher from Cahaba. He dismissed her, of course. He had no use for prayer now, only proof. On the morning of June 18th, Virgilia appeared in the dining room dressed in white. Her hair, once brittle and grey, hung dark and shining down her shoulders. Her skin glowed faintly, not with health, but with something luminous and wrong. The servants froze where they stood. Even Thornhill, proud man that he was, took a step back. "Edmund," she said softly, "you don't need your notes anymore. The work is done." He stared at her. "Done? What do you mean, done? The society is watching," she interrupted, smiling faintly. "They're watching through you, through me, through the blood." She reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was cold. That evening, Thornhill locked himself in his study and wrote to Charleston again, his handwriting wild, erratic. Transfusion complete. Result, subject revived, vigorous, but altered, Speta. Which displays knowledge not her own, references ancient symbols, serpent iconography, Ouroboros, process of renewal through consumption, claims union of blood created a third entity, possible contamination of moral essence, request further instruction. No reply ever came. 2 nights later, Celia was sent to tend to Mrs. Thornhill. She found the bedroom door open, the room empty except for the chair, still warm, and a trail of wet footprints leading down the hall. They stopped at the cellar door. It was unlocked for the first time in months. Celia descended halfway before the stench drove her back. Later she told Esther that the walls down there were breathing. Around midnight, Thornhill gathered the servants. He said nothing about his wife, nothing about Silas. He only ordered that every window be nailed shut, every mirror covered with cloth. "If you hear her voice," he said, "do not answer. If you see her shadow, turn away." But by then, it was too late. Virgilia was no longer something that could be contained by walls or nails or prayer. Because what lived in her now was not human, and it wanted out. Before we go further, I want you to do something, to mark this moment, to separate who you were from who you'll be after hearing the rest. Comment the phrase, "Blood remembers." Twice below, once for the body, once for the soul. Now, brace yourself. Because the next part isn't history, it's contagion. The thunder started before dawn, rolling over the Alabama hills like distant cannon fire. But there was no rain, no lightning, just the sound, endless and low, as though something ancient was stirring beneath the clay. Thornhill sat in his study, the shutters bolted tight, the lamp burning low. The pages of his journal were smeared with ink and blood. He no longer knew which stains came from the quill and which from his own shaking hands. Outside the door, the servants had barricaded themselves in the kitchen. Marcus held a rusted musket. Esther clutched her Bible so tightly her fingers bled at the edges. Celia kept whispering her mistress's name, begging her not to come upstairs again, because she had come back. Sometime after midnight, they heard her voice drifting through the vents, soft at first, like the hum of a lullaby, then rising into something that scraped at the mind. A woman's tone, but not Virgilia's. It was too smooth, too measured, like something learning to speak by imitating what it had consumed. The colonel had barred the cellar door, but he could still feel her beneath him. The house pulsed with her rhythm, floorboards expanding and contracting like lungs. Every few minutes, a faint thump from below, perfectly timed, like a heartbeat echoing up through the foundation. He wrote in the margin of his notes, "The blood remembers. I see now, it never belonged to her or to him. It is its own intelligence." By midday, he could no longer tell if he was awake. The morphine barely dulled the visions. His wife standing by the window, whispering to the reflection that wasn't hers. Silas walking behind her, skin grey, eyes black as coal, no whites left at all. Sometimes, he swore he saw them in the same frame, two bodies flickering in and out of each other like candlelight seen through moving water. At sunset, the dogs broke loose from their chains. They sprinted into the fields, howling until their throats tore raw. The air turned metallic. The birds vanished. And then, the whisper came again, closer this time, from the other side of his door. "Edmund." He froze. "I'm better now." He lifted the pistol. "Stay where you are." A laugh, low, wet, not quite human. "You gave me life, my love. You gave me him. You can't take that back." When he fired, the sound didn't echo. The house swallowed it whole. The servants found him hours later, alive but broken, sitting in his chair, staring at the blood pooling under the door. On the floor beside him lay the pistol and his journal, open to a single line written over and over again. It wasn't resurrection, it was exchange. Downstairs, the cellar door hung open, and inside, Silas and Virgilia were gone. Only the walls remained, wet, red, and pulsing like living flesh. Esther fled that night, barefoot through the cane fields. She said she could still hear the colonel calling his wife's name behind her, his voice fading into the trees, and when she looked back, the windows of Thornhill Manor glowed faintly red, like eyes watching her escape. Dallas County slept under a blood-colored dawn, and in the distance, the Alabama River began to boil. When the sun rose over Dallas County that morning, the air carried a smell no storm could wash away. Not decay, not smoke, something thicker, metallic, and faintly sweet, like iron steeped in honey. The neighbors saw it first, a red mist drifting above Thornhill's land, low to the ground, moving against the wind. They said it looked like breath. By noon, word had reached the town of Cahaba. A rider claimed he saw Colonel Thornhill wandering the fields in his nightclothes, barefoot, his face painted with his own blood. He was muttering the same phrase again and again. "She's reborn, she's reborn." When they tried to approach him, he fled back toward the manor, disappearing into the fog that clung to the earth like a curse. That night, a delegation of men, planters, a sheriff and a preacher, rode out to the Thornhill estate. They found the front doors open. The candles inside were burning, though no one had lit them. The clock in the drawing room had stopped at 3:11. The preacher said that was the hour Christ died, but no one was in a mood to discuss theology. They found Thornhill in his study, sitting upright at his desk. His eyes were open, but he wasn't breathing. His body was cold, yet the ink on his final note was still wet. One line, no salutation, no signature. "It chose her because she was dying. It chose me because I thought I could control it." The cellar was sealed with iron nails driven in from the outside. When the sheriff pried it open, a wave of heat rolled out so intense it blistered the wood. The men who entered said the walls glistened like they'd been varnished in blood, and the air hummed faintly, like a swarm of insects just beyond hearing. In the far corner, they found a single chair, overturned. Beside it lay a discarded corset, a torn shirt, and a handful of long, dark hairs still wet at the roots. No trace of Silas, no body, no bones, just a small iron ring on the floor, the kind used to shackle ankles. It was twisted into a perfect circle, as though melted and reshaped by hand. The preacher ordered the place condemned. He read scripture over the grounds, salted the threshold, and nailed a wooden cross to the cellar door, but a week later the cross fell. Not by wind or weather, it fell inward, snapped clean through the middle. By autumn, Thornhill Manor was abandoned, the crops withered, the soil turned grey. Locals began calling it the house that breathes. Hunters swore they could still hear movement inside, the sound of something dragging chains across the floor, and every few years, someone would claim to see her, Virgilia, standing by the window, the shape of a smaller figure just behind her shoulder. No one ever lasted long near the place. Animals refused to go near the property line, and at night, the river beside it began to glow faintly red, as if the water itself remembered what had been done there. They say history forgets, but the blood doesn't, and neither do the things that woke beneath it. For 20 years, Thornhill Manor stood untouched, its shutters rotting, its gardens drowned in weeds, its doors whispering open and shut in the wind. Time forgot it, but the land didn't. Locals said crops near the property line grew twisted, roots coiled like veins. The birds flew wide circles around it, and when the moon was low, the river beside it turned the color of rusted iron, glowing faintly like something alive beneath the surface. Then, in 1861, when the war came, the house breathed again. Confederate scouts used it as a way station. They camped in the parlor, lit fires in the hearth, laughed at the old ghost stories. But by the second night, none of them were laughing. One of the men, a corporal from Montgomery, woke to the sound of footsteps above him, heavy, uneven, dragging. He called out, thinking it one of his comrades. No answer, just the slow rhythm of someone pacing the upper floor. When he climbed the staircase with his rifle, he found the hall empty, except for a single chair, rocking gently, though no wind stirred. By morning, 3 men had vanished. Their rifles were still stacked neatly by the front door. Their boots were gone, as if they'd walked into the woods barefoot. The lieutenant in charge ordered everyone out by noon. As they left, one private glanced back and swore he saw movement in the upstairs window. A woman's silhouette, tall and still, her face hidden behind the drape, and beside her, a smaller shadow clutching the windowsill. The house sat silent again for another generation until 1893, when a pair of surveyors from Mobile came to map the land. They spent one night inside. Only one returned. His name was William Ashcroft, and when they found him wandering Cahaba's main road at dawn, his hair had gone completely white. He couldn't remember his own name at first. The only thing he said, over and over, was, "She's not dead. She just changed shape." It took months for him to speak clearly again. When he finally did, he told a story no one believed, that beneath Thornhill Manor was not a basement but a hollow that went deeper than the river, lined with something that pulsed and shifted when touched. He said it wasn't stone, it was flesh, living, growing, breathing. He said he saw the colonel there, still alive or what was left of him, hanging upside down from the rafters, veins stretched like roots into the walls. His eyes were open, and something inside them was moving. The doctors dismissed him as mad. The sheriff burned the house to the ground that same summer, but the flames didn't spread right. The roof caved in on itself, leaving the chimney and cellar untouched. The smoke rose straight into the sky and lingered there for 3 days, red as dried blood, and when the ashes cooled, people who passed by swore they could still smell camphor and vinegar, like the breath of someone just beginning to heal. They paved over the ruins in 1921, built a small road over it. Locals still avoid driving it at night, because sometimes when the air is heavy and the fog crawls low, headlights catch something that shouldn't be there. 2 figures in the middle of the road, one tall, one small, both staring, waiting, as if remembering you, and if you ever stop to look back, the road behind you will already be empty. A century passed. The world changed, but the soil of Dallas County did not. Beneath the highways and soybean fields, the bones of Thornhill Manor still slept, wrapped in clay that remembered screams. Locals forgot the story, at least they told themselves they had. But strange things still happened on that land. Power lines flickered for no reason, compasses spun near the old foundation stones. And sometimes, in the low hum of summer nights, people swore they could hear voices rising from the dirt. In 1937, a team from the University of Alabama arrived to conduct soil tests for a proposed agricultural project. They set up camp directly over the old Thornhill property, unaware of what lay beneath. On the 3rd day, their instruments began to fail. Compasses refused to settle, thermometers fluctuated wildly, and the local wildlife disappeared. That night, one of the men woke to find his tent shaking from the inside out, though no wind blew. He claimed he heard whispering, low, guttural, rhythmic. The next morning, they found trenches had opened in the soil overnight. Perfect circles, too clean to be natural. The project was abandoned within a week. No one ever published the data. 2 decades later, in 1956, a highway surveyor uncovered something buried just off County Road 14, a rusted iron door embedded in the ground, sealed shut with lead. The markings were old but distinct, a serpent swallowing its own tail. The Society of Medical Inquiry. No one could explain how a symbol from the 1840s appeared beneath untouched soil. The door was removed and sent to Montgomery for analysis. Within days, the storage facility burned to the ground. The official cause? Electrical fault, but the guard on duty that night told his wife something else before disappearing 2 days later. He said he heard knocking from the inside of the crate. In 1972, a preacher from Selma organized a prayer circle near the site. 50 people gathered under lantern light to purge the curse. They sang hymns until the air turned cold. Witnesses said the wind changed direction, coming from the earth itself, carrying a smell of iron and vinegar. One woman collapsed, convulsing. When she awoke, she spoke in a voice not her own, whispering a single phrase again and again. He gave her the blood. By the time the county paved that section of road in 1985, no one talked about the manor anymore. But the workers did. They said the asphalt bubbled at night, as if heat were rising from beneath. Tools went missing, machines failed. One man swore he saw footprints, bare, small, like those of a child, pressed into fresh tar before hardening in the sun. And still, the place remained quiet, almost peaceful, until 2009, when an amateur historian named Daniel Rourke found a sealed chest while metal detecting near the riverbank. Inside were fragments of bone, a woman's hair ribbon, and a book wrapped in oilcloth. The pages were brittle, but the handwriting was still clear. The blood remembers, it learns, it waits for the next vessel. That night, Rourke uploaded a video describing his find. It never finished processing. Viewers who clicked on the link said it loaded to a black screen that flickered once, showing 2 faces, a woman and a dwarf, both smiling. By the time the 2010s arrived, the legend of Thornhill Manor had almost dissolved into the background noise of Southern folklore, one more ghost story whispered to tourists and skeptics. But something began to happen online. It started with a single forum post on an occult message board in 2013. My great-grandfather worked on a property near Cahaba in 1893. He used to wake screaming, "The walls breathe." Now my daughter says the same thing. I think it's starting again. Within weeks, others joined in. Anonymous users posting strange coincidences, family connections, missing records, inexplicable illnesses. Photos surfaced showing faint red discoloration in the soil around Dallas County, visible only at dusk. Someone dug up the county archives and found that a sealed medical society ledger, supposedly destroyed in 1865, had been quietly purchased by a private collector in 2007. His name, Dr. Edwin Thorne, descendant of Colonel Edmund Thornhill. He ran a biotech startup in Atlanta. The company's logo? A serpent swallowing its own tail. Publicly, Dr. Thorne's firm claimed to specialize in cellular rejuvenation through synthetic hemoglobin fusion. But leaked documents revealed another focus: cross-species gene resilience. In simple terms, blood experiments, the same work his ancestor began nearly 2 centuries earlier, and his research center sat only 70 miles from the ruins of Thornhill Manor. Then came the videos. Security footage from a nearby livestock facility leaked online. In it you could see a test subject, a calf, lying still under surgical light, a mechanical pump attached to its veins. Then, something impossible, the calf's eyes opening mid-procedure, glowing faintly red, its breathing syncing perfectly with the rhythm of the pump. The file was titled THM Sequence, Phase 4. Within hours, it vanished from every platform. Accounts that shared it were suspended. The few who downloaded it said their hard drives corrupted afterward, displaying only one line of text: "The blood remembers." By late 2019, reports of strange occurrences in Dallas County resurfaced. Farmers found dead cattle drained of blood but unmarked. Water in the Alabama River occasionally ran red again, though officials blamed runoff from nearby factories. A group of teenagers exploring the old Thornhill property at night recorded whispering on their phones. Two distinct voices, overlapping. When slowed down, one of them could be heard saying, "He gave her life, now she gives it back." Dr. Thorne disappeared in 2021. His lab burned in what authorities called an industrial accident, but locals near the old Cahaba Bridge began reporting something else that same year, a light moving under the river at night, slow and deliberate, like a lantern being carried by invisible hands. And sometimes, when fog rolled low over the water, they said they could see them, a tall woman and a smaller man, wading through the current. Their faces calm, their eyes bright, looking for something, or someone. It's easy to dismiss it all as myth, convenient lies told by frightened men who wanted to make sense of something that didn't belong to reason. But tell me this, when was the last time you bled, even a little, and watched how quickly your body sealed itself, how perfectly it remembered its own shape? Because memory isn't just in your mind, it's in your blood, and maybe, just maybe, it's not all yours. The storm came without warning. No weather report predicted it, no radar caught its shape. It rose out of the Alabama River like something ancient drawing its first breath, rolling black clouds, thick as oil, swallowing the horizon. Power grids failed across the county within minutes, phones went dark, and on that night the road built over Thornhill Manor's ruins split open again. Witnesses said it began with a sound, low, steady, pulsing, like a heartbeat echoing through the ground. The air vibrated, humming in the bones. Dogs howled, cattle stampeded through fences. Then the rain came, red at first, metallic on the tongue, warm as blood. Near midnight, a convoy of unmarked vans arrived. Men in hazmat suits poured out, armed not with weapons but with vials, scanners, and syringes. They moved with purpose, following instruments that blinked wildly, leading them straight to the collapsed section of road. Cameras recorded the moment one of them stepped into the fissure. He dropped his light down the crack. It didn't hit bottom. What it revealed instead was movement, something shifting deep below, flesh on stone, rhythm on rhythm, breathing. The ground ruptured, a sound like thunder but wet, gurgling, alive. The fissure split wider, tearing the road in half. Those who survived the collapse said they saw it rise, a column of red mist and fragments of something once human, woven together by veins that pulsed with light. In its center stood two figures, clear as day despite the storm, the woman and the dwarf, their faces unchanged, their eyes black and endless. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his mouth moved first, though no sound came out. Then, in the downpour, they began to speak, not in English, not in Latin, but in a sound that lived in the blood. Every living thing in a mile radius froze, birds dropped from the sky, the men in suits screamed without making a sound. Dig. When the storm broke, the sight was gone. The fissure sealed as if it had never existed. The vans were found miles away, empty. Only one camera remained intact, retrieved weeks later from the riverbank. Its final seconds showed a single frame before static consumed it, a woman's reflection in the lens, smiling faintly. After that night, the river changed course, the soil blackened, crops failed in a perfect circle a mile wide. People moved away. The land was declared condemned, unfit for development, and yet, every few years, something happens. A drone feed cuts out over that section, a phone battery dies the moment it passes the coordinates, a deer is found with its veins glowing faintly beneath the skin. They say blood never forgets, it waits, it remembers, it rebuilds. And somewhere, under the weight of history and dirt and time, it still beats, slowly, patiently. A living echo of everything the Thornhills tried to become. If you drive that road tonight, you might see the old sign, half buried, half bent, the paint almost gone, and if you roll down your window, you might smell it again, vinegar, camphor, and something sweet beneath it, like rust and rain. Keep driving, don't stop, don't look back, because if you do, if you meet their eyes, you'll understand the truth. The blood has been whispering for 200 years. It never died. It just found a new host.